Hello everyone, welcome to this ESG webinar today, where we'll be discussing D and I, diversity and inclusion within venture capital. My name is Emil Ghani and I'm the compliance officer here at Lakestar. Before I let the panel introduce themselves, I'll say a few quick words about ESGVC. So ESGVC is an international initiative bringing together the leading VC firms to help investors and early stage companies to measure, monitor and improve their ESG performance. Steering committee members include ourselves, Astronaut, Atomico, Beringia, Piraquity, Seacamp, Talis, and DiversityVC. I think I've got it all there. So as some of you may already know, ESGVC has developed a venture capital ready measurement framework, which asks early stage companies to answer against ESG objectives. There are a number of resources available to assist in then tackling these objectives, as well as monthly webinars such as this, hosted by steering committee members. The frameworks and resources are all available on the website at ESGVC. So I'll let the speakers introduce themselves we'll go in alphabetical order, so I'll let Asha go first.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name's Asha Mistry. I lead talent for Lakestar. My role is split into two, so I'm responsible for HR here at Lakestar Advisors, and the other side is working with our portfolio companies on talent advisory. My background, I spent some time with LinkedIn and Amazon prior to that in executive search. Ed?
My name's Edmund. I'm partner at True Search. True's a global executive search firm specialised in high growth technology. So we spend most of our time working with venture capital and growth equity firms in some capacity. That's either with portfolio or my particular specialism, which is investment professionals. So I spend my entire time looking at probably senior associate, principal, up to partner, general partner into venture capital and growth equity. I've always been in search, so that's my whole career, and I've always specialised in investment professionals. So I'm quite a boring background.
Great, Julia.
Hey, I'm Julia. I'm the operations lead at DiversityVC. We're a non-profit that are trying to increase diversity, inclusion, and really representation in the world of venture capital. I split my time between running our standard community, which is a kind of benchmarking of best practice with regards to DEI, and also Future VC, which is our internship program, placing highly talented individuals from backgrounds currently underrepresented into VC roles. Before that, I was running a program in London, the ecosystem, teaching early stage founders how to access VC, so always in and around this ecosystem.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Cheng. I'm talent director at Notion Capital, which is a B2B SaaS and cloud investor based here in London, but investing across Europe. We have about 60 companies in our core portfolio, and I work post-investment with our founders and their leadership teams around building their companies, organizations, teams, and hiring. And we have the first level certification from DiversityVC, so it's really important to us as well. And we're one of the founding members and participating members of Included VC, which is a program for bringing underrepresented individuals into VC.
Cool, thank you very much everyone. Please do send your questions in the chat function. We'll try to answer them as we go along or towards the end. Great, so to start maybe with you, Edmund, it would be great to hear about the type of requests you're receiving with the firms that you're working with, along with how that looks against the type of candidates that you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. So overall state of the market.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I think certainly pretty much every single request we get now has some kind of diversity lens on it, which in many ways is absolutely great news. I think it's been that way for quite a while. So for the vast majority of firms, diversity is very much on the agenda in terms of trying to get more candidates in at all different levels to represent more fairly, I think, the societies that they invest in. I would say that does tend to gravitate just towards gender diversity these days.
Sure.
And I'd say that that's probably reflected in that for not every single venture capital firm, I don't think that there's a true buy-in maybe to the benefits of diversity generally, and there's a lot of pressure coming from LPs or from particular pockets in the firm to be able to drive that agenda. So the majority of cases, I would say, it is pretty narrowly focused on trying to get more women to move into firms and investors at all different levels. it is probably worth pointing out that that has created a bit of a dynamic in the market where, depending on what level you're looking at, sort of at the junior levels, that's maybe 30–40% of the candidate pool is women, I think, at the associate pools. But then if you get up to partner level, people that are actually doing investing at the moment, that can be as low as 10%, maybe even lower, depending on particular fields like deep tech or what have you. And so what that really means is that you sort of have almost 100% of different investors gravitating towards the same circa 10% of the market, which creates all sorts of different dynamics. And I think that there are a few maybe slightly hidden problems with that actually can, for maybe the unconscientious firm, make hiring even more difficult within those pools. One of the effects is that firms have geared much more towards retention, generally for talent, but particularly when it comes to diversity. I think there's been a huge amount of hiring in tech, as we all know, over the last few years, but there's been a big focus on retention. So trying to create better environments, keep people working in the firm from a cultural perspective, but it has had a knock-on effect in salaries. The more hiring gets done, the more salaries get inflated. We all know that. And there's been a huge push towards title inflation as well. So partner now is, in some firms, possible. The title certainly can be got after only 4 or 5 years of investment experience, whereas only 5–6 years ago, you'd rarely see someone with less than 10 years experience being called a partner. So there's been, I think, a big change in the candidate market from that perspective. But I also think that there have been some changes in the way that candidates probably present in a recruitment process. And I think, as I say, for maybe unconscientious hirers, it has made hiring more difficult even than it should be, given the stats. One of those ways, I think, is that if you imagine you're an experienced female investor working in a top-tier venture capital fund, you're being approached probably 2–3 times a day about particular opportunities, which really maxes out your attention. And certainly everyone is trying to get you to keep your kind of options open. If you're in VC, thinking if you want to move to growth; if you're in growth, asking to move to VC. If you're a SaaS investor, have you ever considered consumer, and vice versa. And so the dynamics of that very, very, very sought after pool become quite tricky to navigate. Firstly, I think getting their attention is very hard, but also, frankly, they have less attention to give. If they are active or starting to become active, they'll have so many different options to choose from. And so naturally, you're going to present in an interview process as perhaps, I'm going to use inverted commas here, but a little bit more demanding than candidates perhaps had done in the past. And I think there's a follow-on there where they've had less time perhaps to prepare their motivations, less time perhaps to think about some of the preparation they might need to do for the more technical parts of an interview process, if for the junior levels, like a case study or what have you. And so the knock-on is that I think for people that aren't prepared for this dynamic, they can often look into the pool and decide that the quality, the absolute quality of candidates, particularly diverse candidates, is going down. Whereas, in fact, it's just a balance between, if you imagine the average man at a partner level interviewing may well only have 1 or 2 options to choose from, has a lot more time to commit to those processes and a lot more time to refine their motivations, the way they present. And in fact, what's going on is that processes tend to bias very heavily towards high levels of preparation. So I think the firms that have got really, really good at conquering that have probably been the ones who have embraced diversity more fully. Mm-hmm. And thought actually about the benefits of bringing people on board who aren't just run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter candidates you might have hired 3–4 years ago, a couple of years IB, maybe consulting, and then moving into investing, but considering operators, considering people that come from completely different backgrounds, because it has 2 different advantages. One is it helps you to de-bias your process against those experience and preparation points. But it also expands the candidate pool, so you have more talent to choose from, and especially if you are targeting particular diverse profiles, you have a lot more to pick. But there aren't many firms that are capable of doing that at the moment, but I would say that those that have really thought about it and pushed themselves to get beyond that kind of, I need someone with an investment track record already, have been able to reap the benefits of having much more choice, and also just being able to get more people in. And the flip side is that they create an environment people actually want to join as well, if they come from a minority profile, basically. Good enough summary.
I think so.
Yeah,
So, I hope so.
I'm done now.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So I suppose, so everyone on the table, so how do you go about them balancing that challenge of diversity and inclusion with meritocracy in the hiring process, or finding those candidates that you think fit, the project that you're on?
Sure, I think I'll start a little bit on that. And just going back to a few statistics. But it's stats there, we've got between 30% and 30% females with it. And if that's what we're focusing on, or a company's focusing on, when you get to that shortlist stage, you need to have an equal balance of gender, because then they have a chance of getting the role. If you're unable to get them to that shortlist stage, that's when there's a challenge, and you've got to really think about what's your purpose as a firm, why are you actually doing this, and how you're representing yourselves, how well networked is the business, how well are you nurturing talent outside, not just within the investment community, but outside that, to share kind of your purpose, what you're doing, how you're working together. It takes a while, and there's some small steps, but it does. I think it starts with going back to the basics of really understanding the market, but also equally understanding what you want to do as a firm, what you're working towards, and the steps that every person in the firm needs to take to get there, to attract that kind of inbound.
I agree with that. I think all in, it's buy-in at every level, right up to the short list. So making changes from, where we advertise, the communities that we speak with, and how they're engaged throughout the entire candidate process. And I think I mentioned as well, just de-biasing that as much as possible for as long as you can. And that includes, blind assessments in some cases, and trying to keep the candidates anonymous for as long as we can in terms of assessing their profiles based on capability as opposed to pedigree.
And then just on that, then coming into the interview process, if you're broadening that aperture of experience, I think, to your point earlier, you can't really look at 10 years investing experience as a criteria to hire. If that's the case, if you're looking to broaden that, you then need to broaden the criteria for the interview process. Maybe in the past, you've always hired people from investment banking or a particular sector, which would over-index on the financial and analytical experience. If you're broadening that pool, it may include people that don't have that pedigree from that particular background, which means as an interviewer, the questioning and how you're assessing the candidate needs to adjust. So you're pulling out the strengths and the reasons why you would consider that profile versus comparing, candidate X to candidate Y with a typical background, and making a choice from the two, because it's more likely you'll go for the one that you know better, because you know that would be successful in your firm.
I think you also need to think a little bit more about just in general the team structure. If you're trying to broaden out your candidate pool and who you're trying to hire from and the experience you're going for, chances are you're doing that because you want to get a more diverse pool of thought within the team, and you want people who think differently. So some of the firms that we work with who have been the most successful in this are also the ones who actually sat down and said, okay, where are the gaps in our skill set, in our knowledge, in our understanding? Who do we know? What do we think would be really useful? And when they meet someone who they think, right, this person has the raw talent or is just really smart and will be able to pick this up to do this job. If they meet someone and they think, oh, right, this person's also thinking very differently to the rest of the team, that can only be a benefit. They're going to help you find businesses that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. I should also say, it's not just about the interview process, but it's also about thinking through your training process as well once people come on. To use your previous example, if they haven't got that pedigree of finance when they join, just be aware, have a little bit of training budget set aside so that you can actually train new candidates in finance. If you hire someone smart, they're going to be able to pick it up from any background.
Yeah. I think that just on that point, it's so commonly said by investors that really the finance toolkit is in some ways the easiest to train in. Yeah, it tends to be really over-indexed and a real kind of pass-fail situation for a lot of firms. I think it's getting better, and it has been getting better for 5 or 6 years. Certainly a little while ago, it genuinely was mainly just sort of financial questions and market sizing and what have you, which has changed. But given it's probably the most hard skill, and so as a result, you can kind of train it. It probably should be somewhere near the bottom of what you're looking for in terms of capability if you've got the training processes set up internally.
That's also because it's a hard skill. It's one of the easier ones to say we don't want this candidate because of X, and therefore you just need to kind of think a little bit more about hiring criteria. It's general.
Yeah, having a very strict scorecard in terms of how much you're weighting, things like financial acumen and whether that's truly what you want to prioritize at the very top.
Well, dare I say, it's so often that I think scorecards are super important, and it's what we'd recommend always. We try and hold ourselves accountable when we're running searches as well, to kind of agree a scorecard and rate people against it. It's so often the case that scorecards are abandoned when it comes to the senior investors making a selection at the very end. But it's actually precisely in those instances where someone has a very, very long history of assessing someone, assessing people in a kind of like slightly random way, where they will have clear criteria in their own mind, but that is really set up against a benchmark of candidates who have looked for, if they've had a 20-year career, for 15 of those years, someone's looked identical. It wasn't long ago that over 50% of candidates in VC came from Goldman, Morgan Stanley, or JP Morgan. And so if you've got a track record of assessing candidates that all come from that background, you haven't thought carefully about your scorecard, people are always going to be benched against the 400 interviews you've done in your life prior. And so to some extent, the more senior you are, the more important it is to be able to kind of have the courage to leave behind that kind of personal benchmark and your personal interviewing style, and like sync with the team to make sure that you're actually evaluating the skills that you really need. But it's super hard to do, because we all feel, I mean, I do it the same way. If you can, I still benchmark people emotionally against against 100 interviews I did last year. Yeah.
But the best thing about that is you can unlearn those habits. And by talking internally and aligning on the why and the purpose and how you would assess differently, and staying true to that through the process. I know it sounds easy to talk about it, right? But when you're in the process, and you'll compete, especially last year when the industry was just absolutely booming and everyone was moving, everyone was trying to kind of catch up or hire when they needed to hire. But if you stay true to the reasons why you're hiring and why you're looking at diversifying your investment team or whatever it might be, it may take a little bit longer to find the person, but at least hopefully in the end you'll find the right one.
Just on that, I suppose, I think this might sound like a bit of an obvious question, but I'll go back to you, Asha. Like, why does the industry need diversity and inclusion, perhaps?
I don't know. You know, I was going to say I would pass the point in explaining the why, but you know, diversity of thought, diversity of experience. I think it's really important for you know, if you think about society in general, if you're attracting brilliant founders, let's say in technology, they can come from any background. And statistics show, and we know that people from underrepresented groups, including females, are more likely to approach or have the courage to, or you know, have the network to approach somebody that may look like them, have a similar educational experience, have a similar background to them. And so if you have an homogenized team that have all come from the same mill, it's likely that there isn't a network there, and there's a massive network gap. So as an investing fund, you're actually missing out on this huge potential, this huge group of businesses or founders that you might want to invest in, and it will take longer to kind of bridge that gap. That's just one thing, but it, you know, just trying to summarize. Yeah, sure.
I think access to new markets, unconventional solutions to traditional problems, and I think just generally new ways of looking at issues that, you know, the mainstream society might not have taken a different view to. And I think absolutely considering new points of view is one of many reasons to, as far as the why behind diversity and inclusion.
Sure.
I was going to say, I mean, one point I think is important to raise as well. I agree with all of that, but personally, VC, the private equity asset class in general, has a huge amount of global power. There's vast amounts of the world economy are kind of dictated by a very small number of individuals working in private capital funds. And I do think that there are great economic reasons to kind of democratize that as well. But there is a sense where outside of the political system, there's a few more efficient ways, I think, to democratize the economic financial power that these funds have by allowing them to look more like the societies that they represent and invest in, which for me I find quite important. But like it doesn't have to be either or, like they're both, I think, really important reason.
Amazing. And Julia, maybe for you, in terms of your experience with DiversityVC and the community that you have there, especially with the emergence of more frameworks and this push for transparency, how, and as well as pressure from LPs, right? How are firms, in terms of what you're seeing, dealing with the issue of talent management and diversity and inclusion within hiring and talent retention?
I'll say to start with, there's a little bit of bias in that if a firm comes to us, they're probably already bought into a certain extent to the fact that it's a good idea to diversify the industry. So to an extent, I'm aware that I'm sometimes preaching to the choir. They've probably already done quite a lot of research. They probably already have a sort of a bit of an idea of what will work for them within their organisation and what won't. And most of the time, even if the entire team isn't bought in, there will already be at least one or two individuals who are really, really bought into the mission and have already identified exactly how they're going to make the rest of the team kind of fall in line, for lack of a better term. When it comes to like the actual talent pool and the hiring that you but that is actually quite often one of the areas where they're not quite sure where to start. There are a lot of programs to help bring new talent in. We've mentioned Future VC, we've mentioned Included VC. There's also the New to Venture program. There's quite a few of the large firms are also involved with 1,000 Black Interns, which isn't just with VC focused. So quite often they do start with an internship program because, again, apart from last year, there's not usually that much of a hiring cycle within venture capital. Can't usually just generally say, okay, great, we're going to hire for 10 new roles in the next year. How are we going to make sure that this works? Unless it's a huge firm. So usually everyone starts with internship, starts with kind of broadening their networks for the short-term hire, and just also using that sometimes to, I guess, change the thinking slightly of some of the individuals in the firm who might not be so committed to begin with. If you put a candidate in front of them who's not from a background that they traditionally hire from, who doesn't fit into the criteria of the same 100 interviews they'd usually go for, and they can see that they're fantastic at the job because they have a different thought process, because they have different networks, and that's a really good starting point to change people's thought processes.
Well, in terms of moving on, in terms of diversity and inclusion within investments, something that I think we've kind of touched on here. I think how important, maybe Michelle, for you to answer this, is how important is diversity of the team when you're going out and speaking with founders? Have you seen any sort of synergy with that, or the importance of that?
I think there's been increasing interest from founders in terms of looking at Notion's own team and how we bring in diversity in the investment team, but also then once they're part of the portfolio, what kind of support is available to their leaders and to how they begin scaling their company. So definitely participating in more conversations around that, but also upskilling our team at Notion in terms of how we look for diverse founders, how we build a diverse culture within Notion that reflects what founders value, because that's how you sort of remain relevant and continue that conversation with them. So it's definitely very important. And our investing team, most recently we're 50% now, so that allows us to have those conversations and sort of express those values in a way that is authentic.
Amazing. And in terms of back to DiversityVC, we are doing quite a lot in terms of pushing the agenda with tracking this within the investment flow. I think, what specific things are you looking for, and that's what challenges VC firms are sharing with you when it comes to that?
Like looking for
so tracking diversity within the deal flow and sourcing process.
First of all, to your point, we've had quite a few firms and founders actually get in touch saying this is something to care about. Firms saying more founders started talking to us and saying you got the deal because we like the fact that we could see representation on your website. And I've had some founders get in touch with me saying, we've seen this thing about the standard, a firm was committed to it, we quite like the fact that it showed that they were committed to D, and I want to hear a bit more about this. How can we find other firms who are also committed? Like, it's definitely something that more and more founders are starting to pay attention to, which is amazing. In terms of deal flow, we start off just by encouraging everyone to actually just track who they're talking to a certain extent. Like, just say, try and figure out the demographics of who you are speaking to and who's coming through your pipeline. There's a few different ways of doing this. Some firms use assumed data, which is broadly okay so long as you are only ever using that data for to check internally if there's any potential bias in the process. More firms prefer to use declared data. That's a bit more comfortable because you can at least comfortably say that I know this person I spoke to identifies as X, Y, or Z. But it's just a starting point, because just one of the biggest challenges that firms traditionally have said to us is, I always use gender as an example, even though obviously diversity is more than gender, but for GDPR reasons and everything else, it's always the easiest one to track. We always used to hear firms saying, oh, we want to diversify our portfolio, but there are no women founders. And then they'd go and track who they were speaking to and realise that there are actually quite a few women founders. They just weren't making it past a certain stage of the investment process. Sometimes that is for a genuine reason to do with the fund's thesis. In fact, most of the time it is to do with the fund's thesis. Sometimes there may be a little bit of bias in terms of what's being looked for, the way that the classic way of questions are being asked. Men get asked to promote themselves, women get asked to defend themselves when pitching. But just starting with that helps people actually figure out where a candidate's falling off, where we're not talking about deal flow, but where are founders falling off the pipeline? How can we address this? If it is genuinely that people don't fit into the fund thesis, why is that? Is there another firm that we know that we can actually send them towards, and actually how can we help these founders grow and move forward? And sometimes it's a case of stage as well. So a lot of, you were kind of quoting earlier the fact that less than 1% of all female founded teams ended up getting funding for VC 1 year. That's across the board. That's not just later stage, that's early stage as well. There is this bottleneck of underrepresented talent not getting the early stage funding that makes them investable by later stage firms. So if firms are tracking that and seeing that, that also helps us as an industry actually identify what needs to be done at an early stage as well as a later stage.
No, I think it's so interesting. My focus is less on the kind of founder side, but it seems like a similar kind of dynamic to how I think good hiring practices has evolved, where I think in the past there was a sense of like, I've got the same case study, the same modeling test, the same interview questions, and then we just kind of eliminate people. Whereas I think now there's a sense of fostering people that you think might have it, but maybe for whatever reason lacks the preparation, or have this their first interview, giving them another chance, keeping them under the wing as a firm, connecting them with other people in your network. And I think as broadly from a hiring perspective, you've seen a lot more of that, which has been super helpful in giving underrepresented candidates a lot more confidence and a lot more experience, the mentorship that might bridge some of the gaps of what they experience versus other candidates. And it sounds like actually from a founder perspective, like actually adopting the same approach is super helpful.
There's a reason I'm muddling up the terminology, because it can be very similar in the way that the firm approach it.
But you're so right, it goes beyond the very top. It includes the types of questions that are being asked and the stages that you're putting through, and being very intentional about what we'd like to be inclusive about, and maybe setting aside some traditional judgments or questions that might otherwise filter out.
And also even thinking a bit more about when you're going out to speak to people from a certain network, and when people are coming through your pipeline, thinking about what is the, I hate use the, I mean, we work with VC, so this is Logan, what is the return and what is the speed of return on any given conversation with a founder? Because I think often investors want to be able to say they spoke to a founder and hope that founder will very quickly become part of a portfolio and be able to make a return on investments for LPs. Sometimes, again, because of that bottleneck, maybe you're talking to a founder who isn't suitable for your firm for whatever reason, but if you spend the time actually working closely with that founder and really help them, they're going to remember you well. When they come across another founder from their own network, which is probably going to be quite different to an average VC firm's, they will know who's looking for support. They might be able to actually say, oh, check out this firm, this particular individual is really great, make an introduction. And we spoke to one of the firms who's been certified under our under the standard, was saying how they started going to open office hours, for example, not because they expect to actually speak to 10 people and get 10 investments. They maybe would speak to 10 people, get no investments, but get 20 introductions as a result. And there's just so much that could be done in terms of deal flow sourcing and introductions, and just being open to sharing and communicating and support.
Amazing. And just to maybe go back to something that's been brought up, is then what's the sort of like, not discrepancies, but the nuances you see between geographies, perhaps between UK and mainland Europe when it comes to that?
Mostly in terms of local laws about questions you can and can't ask. That's
Sure.
the big one.
Yeah.
That's the really, really big one.
Disclosure, yeah.
Yeah. So in the UK, for example, if you are collecting data from someone that is declared data, you can ask quite a bit more. Most people ask about gender, most people ask about ethnicity. Some people are starting to ask about things like socioeconomic background, sexuality, disability, hopefully all anonymised, obviously. In many places on the continent, you just can't do that. You can ask about gender and that is it. Or legally, it's okay to, legally you're technically allowed to ask these questions, and culturally it's just really not acceptable. I think that's the biggest difference. We know a few funds who work around this by they'll ask about gender, and then they also have, at least one fund we work with has, do you in any way identify as an underrepresented founder? And then they have a list of who might in any way count as an underrepresented founder. And I mean, I think for the purposes of just figuring out who you're talking to that has traditionally not been invested in the industry, that works to an extent. It doesn't help you figure out exactly which networks you're missing out on, but it's a stepping stone.
And maybe from Michelle and Asha, from sort of the VC perspective, without obviously divulging too much, what kind of conversations or pressure are you seeing from investors or LPs when it comes to this topic? Is there very much a tick box or just a snapshot? What level of engagement are you guys seeing, or interaction? Be interesting to hear your perspectives on that.
I think certainly higher this year than before, and
Sure.
a lot more interest. And I think the perspective has been quite pragmatic in terms of understanding there are certain things we can ask and certain things that we can't. And in addition to that, being a minority investor and coordinating with all the other investors in that company as well. So I think it's been pretty flexible, but there have been more questions that have prompted us to, look at how we collect data, build some structure into it, build some rigor into it, so that we can have confidence and build in that repeatability, knowing that's going to come annually now in terms of how we report on and are held accountable to diversity data.
Yeah, pretty much so. I agree with you on that. And the questions are always going to be there, and there's always going to be that, is this a tick box exercise or is it not? But there has to be some intention, there has to be some purpose behind it, and it's not going to go away. Diversifying the workforce, diversifying the industry, it's not going away. And so by taking it seriously now, making those small steps and having those conversations, I think it's really important for people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and asking those questions, and being within a group where you can ask those questions and really truly understand what you're doing here and the purpose for it. And that's where it starts.
Yeah. Okay. And for you, Ed, in terms of, it's obviously a topic that's not going away, it's more and more prominent. So how has True adapted to the changing environment, with D&I being more and more important in terms of being on, as being considered?
I think, well, broadly speaking, there's quite a lot we're trying to do internally, I think, because there is a sense of getting your own house in order before kind of preaching a lot to others, and that's hard as well. So when we look at our own hiring, I think we've tried to, as far as possible, embody the kind of diversity that we like to see within our clients, and encourage ourselves to think out of the box. So a lot of that is quite mundane stuff, like forcing ourselves to have interview scorecards for our own candidates, really thinking about the intentionally about the bar that we're setting, what are important skills, what are learned ones. Just because of the amount of hiring that's been done over the last couple of years, we've been forced to broaden our own aperture in terms of the kind of people we're bringing into the firm as well, which has been super helpful at stretching our own views about like what's what a good candidate looks like when you bring in a principal that's only worked in the startup field and hasn't worked in executive search before. You get some amazing ideas about what would be an acceptable candidate, or who we should be pushing and for what reasons. we've got quite a few initiatives internally. We have 10-10 initiative, basically means that for every single search we do, we commit to a certain portion of the slate we're putting forward to, even if there's been no request on diversity at all, to come from underrepresented backgrounds, both specifically measure ethnicity and gender when we can. In the States, obviously, there's fewer regulations around that, so it's a lot easier. And then I think when it comes to hiring for our clients, I mean, the biggest thing that I feel like we do on a daily basis is try and push the envelope a bit on not saying, oh, you should consider more women for the search or what have you, but actually trying to get people to relax some of the harder criteria on background that will allow us to open the aperture a bit. And that can look in a number of different ways. Sometimes you just have to be willing to be flexible on level in order to get the right proportion of candidates in who come from underrepresented backgrounds. But also riding the wave a little bit and we do spend so much of our time in investment professionals practice looking at operators, people coming from startups and scale-ups who might have developed that skill set to be a great investor. They just need someone to sort of train and mentor them. And so I think from when we're working with funds, there's a lot of attention we put in just trying to put the best of that candidate pool in front of clients, and showing them, from that experience point, if you just try it once and you have a great story, then suddenly you want to hire everyone from completely different backgrounds. And it often doesn't take much to get that there. So it's probably where we have the most success, I think.
Amazing. And perhaps just to summarise, and I think that everyone goes around the table, sort of what piece of advice would you give to VC firms at the beginning or in the middle of their sort of D&I journey, as it were? Judith, start perhaps there on the bus, sorry.
Yeah. I just realised there was something we were talking about before we even started the call that I thought I was going to spend the entire time talking about having, which is networks.
Mm.
It's going to be, to your point, it's going to be really tough at the beginning. There's going to be some really hard conversations about who we're bringing on, why are we doing this, what do we need to change. But once I haven't quite yet figured out what the tipping point is, because for every firm it seems to be different. There's a certain stage of which, once you just get into those networks that you haven't been tapping into before, whether that's for hiring for your own team or for investing in, it just gets easier. Like you get known. People come to firms because they know that you're interested in hiring from a diverse background of individuals, that you're interested in investing in a diverse background, group of backgrounds. You start getting referrals. We found this with our own internship program, that like our alumni are now sending people over to us. Like, just get into the networks. It's not a quick fix. There's no such thing as a quick fix. But at some point, everything's going to get marginally easier. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be marginally easier. You're never done on DEI.
I mean, and on that, leading from that, I was going to say, yes, broaden the network, but it's patience. Have patience. Build on those networks, build on the relationships, and as a fund, if you are looking to diversify your workforce, really be vocal about that purpose. Talk about it. Call out the elephant in the room. Candidates want to know why. Why are you approaching them? What is the reason? What is your philosophy? How is your firm kind of moving forward with that? Just be really open and be comfortable with being open, and sometimes not having the answer, but saying we're working on it, because it's not going to get solved overnight. It's not a tick box exercise.
I think all of the above, and I think generally being pretty open to changing the way things are typically done, which I think it's so easy to sort of agree with it conceptually, but then once it becomes, because venture moves so quickly in terms of how quickly term sheets need to be issued, how quickly the conversations happen, it does take some foresight and some planning and some additional steps in the process in terms of when we record the data, when we have to ask the questions, how we add the information into investment memos. And it's all slight changes to the way things have traditionally been done. And that does take commitment and rigor and consistency. And I think sticking with it is very worth it. But yeah, being patient and sticking with the process and trusting in the process.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about it from just a hiring into a VC perspective, but I think the biggest thing I think I would say to firms sort of at the beginning of this journey is to really try and think about how underrepresented candidates in your own firm are going to present differently, to try and anticipate that. And then not just recognize that in your interview process, but to put real effort and attention into trying to make your organization the kind of place that they'd actually want to work. Because especially at the moment when it's a bit of a bum fight for all talent, and especially for diverse talent, there comes this point where you may well have some great success bringing on a whole new cohort of just female investors at the associate level, but if you don't have an environment in which they feel comfortable and inspired to come to work, you will lose them at the principal level. You won't be able to attract people at the senior level, and you'll never be able to kind of break out this cycle of just trying to sort of backpedal and being a little bit under where the industry is at. So I think if you really want to get ahead of it, you have to kind of think about how you can just break out of what the industry is doing and be ahead of the game, because that will create an environment that people actually directly come to. You'll find that you get the network effect. You'll find that it gets easier because you bring more people in and people are happy, and you reap the benefits. If you're just always reactive and thinking only in terms of let's just get people in the door, you'll always find you on the back foot because you won't keep them.
Amazing. I think we are at time, but I'd like to thank all you guys for joining. I think we've had a really positive and useful conversation on the topic. A copy of this recording will be made available shortly. DiversityVC will have a short summer break before returning in September, I believe, with Atomico.